class, and welcome to week 4, which is social, emotional, and moral development. We're going to be talking about these two topics and how they progress from infancy throughout old age. I'd like to start with a quote. This is by the famous Greek Aristotle, who said, "Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all." So while most weeks we concern ourselves with students' content knowledge, this week we're going to take a moment and think about them as social and emotional well-beings and also about their moral development. Here's our vocabulary preview. You can take a look at the words you are responsible to know and the pages that they're on. Today we're going to be talking about social emotional development throughout school, the school years. We're going to be talking about two important theorists, Kohlberg, who put forth the theory of moral development, Erikson, who put forth a theory of psychosocial development, and some problems of adolescence. So first, how do students develop socially and emotionally in elementary and early middle school? Well, students' development in this stage is influenced by their self-concept, which is the way we perceive our own strengths, weaknesses, abilities, attitudes, and values. So we all sort of walk around with this mental image of ourselves in the head. Our self-concept, for example, may indicate that we're good in math, we're good in science, we're generous to others, we're helpful. Self-esteem, however, is how we evaluate our skills and abilities. So we evaluate those abilities and we either have high self-esteem or low self-esteem. Students start to develop this self-concept in elementary school and it strengthens as they get into middle school. However, later in elementary and again in middle school, they start to compare themselves with others. So they look at other people and they say, I'm not as good at math as she is, for example, or I am a better drawer than he is, a better artist. During this period, there's a gradual movement towards peers becoming increasingly more important, friendships that had been fleeting becoming longer term and taking a more important or more central role in students' lives. And as they enter late elementary and early middle, peer acceptance becoming critical. Children progress through relationships in a predictable pattern. If we look at this bullseye, you'll see that the center of the bullseye when a child is small is the parents. The parents are who provide nurturing and establish trust with the child. Gradually, other family members are included: siblings, grandma, grandpa, aunts, and uncles. Moving out from that, the child first encounters non-related adults in the form of perhaps daycare workers or teachers or community members. Finally, it is in elementary school where the child learns the importance of peers and comes to need and trust peers. So it goes from parents all the way out through peers. In late middle and high school, there's a gradual waning influence of parents and other family members as students of this age strike out to develop other types of relationships. In general, there tends to be less respect for authority, including parents and teachers. And this is the first time we see reflectivity, or the ability to think about what's going on in one's own mind and study oneself. So the student becomes aware of him or herself as a person and is actively able to engage in thinking about what type of person they are. James Marcia, who expanded on some of the work of the theorists we're going to see later, conducted interviews and found that in adolescence, there are 4 kinds of categories of identity establishment going on. Some adolescents are what's in call foreclosure. They've not experienced any kind of identity crisis, and they have an identity that's based on their parents' choices. This is generally the very young adolescent who's still almost like a child. They've not had to encounter anything that would make them question who they are. Identity diffusion, some adolescents are in this. They may have experienced an identity crisis, but they've made little or no progress of their own towards establishing an identity. Moratorium is a third stage. This is when the individual is in the middle of an identity crisis and has begun to experiment with choices but has come to no conclusions about identity. So, in this case, they've been through some sort of identity crisis or they're questioning adults. They know that adults, for the first time, they might understand that adults don't have all the answers. They're trying to figure out who they are. Um, and they've started to experiment with some choices, but they haven't gotten all the way there yet. And finally, identity achievement is they've gone through the crisis, they understand who they are, and they make conscious decisions about their own identity, decisions that aren't necessarily handed to them from their parents. Let's talk for a moment about moral development. Moral development, society could not function without rules that tell people how to communicate with one another. So, for example, without moral development, you wouldn't have laws that say you can't steal from each other, you can't kill each other. Just as children differ from adults in cognitive and personal development, they also differ in their moral reasoning. Many people go into teaching without realizing this important fact, and so are sort of shocked when they encounter students cheating, for example. But as we will see, it could be seen as a normal part of moral development that students will go through these stages before they understand that cheating is wrong. Moral development has been studied by researchers around the world, and there's a famous problem called the trolley problem. I'm not going to tell you much about it because it's part of this week's learning module. You'll have to watch a video about it and reflect on it in the discussion post. One of the famous researchers who studied moral reason is Lawrence Kohlberg, and he came up with a theory about moral reasoning. He said that people go through stages of moral reasoning, just like you go through, think about Piaget and his stages of cognitive development. Well, Kohlberg came up with a theory that said people go through stages of moral reasoning. It's basically an elaboration and refinement of work that Piaget done in this area earlier. He studied children's responses to a series of structured situations or moral dilemmas. So he presented them at different ages with a little moral dilemma. What should happen here? And he recorded their answers, and he came up with these stages based on those interviews. He came up with a series of 6 stages that are divided up into 3 levels, 2 stages each level. So the pre-conventional level, the conventional level, and the post-conventional level. Let's see what we mean by this. Here are the 6 stages of moral development. So at the pre-conventional level, you have 2 stages. The first is obedience and punishment. And in this stage, which is the young child, um, they avoid things because they're afraid to be punished. So if they're tempted, for example, to steal a cookie from the cookie jar, they might say, no, I'm not going to do that because I will get punished. So this is a very basic early stage called obedience and punishment. Second stage is individualism and exchange. And this is again a pre-conventional level. But in this stage, which is also early elementary young child, the right behaviors are those that are in best interest of oneself, tit for tat mentality. So what that means is I'll do something nice for you if you do something nice for me. This is very typical, excuse me, for example, of kindergartners who are saying, well, I'll help you if you help me, but don't do it really out of a sense of morality. There are two stages at the conventional level. The third stage, or the first at the conventional level, consists of interpersonal relationships. And here people do good things because they want to be nice to someone. They want to get somebody's favor. Maybe they want to make a friend. I'll let you cheat off me if you'll be my friend, kind of thing. And the second stage at the conventional, the fourth stage in the sequence, is called authority and social order. And really, a lot of people never advance beyond this stage, but it's very often seen at late elementary, adolescent. These folks at this stage maintain that law and order is the highest ideal, and social obedience is a must to maintaining a functional society. So, for example, it's never people at this stage would think it's never permissible to break that law, that all laws must be good. So you would never think of going out and stealing something, for example, if you believe that a life could be saved. So this would be authority and social order. And the reason you would believe that is because you would believe that the law is the right thing. Two stages are at the post-conventional level. The first of those, and the fifth in the sequence, is called social contract. And you begin to learn that others have different values. And so you might begin to say that law is contingent on the culture. So you might begin to see that not all laws are the same and not all laws are equal, and that it's okay to break some laws if they're unjust. And finally, the last stage that some people come to and some people don't is called universal principles. And this is where you develop an internal moral principle that guides you. And you begin to believe that there are times when the laws are unjust. For example, the abolitionists who fought against slavery believed those laws are unjust and were willing to make sacrifices to overcome them. So you do good things here, not because you have to or you want to make friends or the law says you have to, but because you have this internal code of what's right and what's wrong. There's a wording that will help you remember these, and you can talk about this with students. So, level one, obedience and punishment, is if a student says, I don't want to be punished. Level two, individualism and exchange, you might hear a student say, I want a reward. Level three, interpersonal relationships, I want to please somebody I care about. Level four, authority and social order, I follow the rules. Level five, social contract, empathy. I think of others before I think of myself. And finally, level six, integrity, universal principles. I think of others before I think of myself, and I don't seek recognition for doing so. So, is it possible to not only recognize where students are in these levels of moral reasoning, but to move them to another level? Yes, researchers suggest it is possible that teachers can help students move to higher levels of moral development. For example, you can engage students in creating classroom rules and expectations. Instead of setting a lot of classroom rules, set few, and instead of just setting them yourselves, guide students in a classroom discussion to come up with these rules at the beginning of the year so that they'll understand how they were evolved and why they are just. Moral dilemma discussions, such as the trolley problem that you'll encounter later, help students move to the next level as well. Role playing, modeling good social behavior, and reasoning and negotiating with students all help move students to the next level. What's not helpful in moving students to the next level is to say that they're wrong, to punish them for being wrong without helping them understand the reason behind the rule. Let's talk for a bit about social and emotional development. As children improve their cognitive skills, they're also developing self concepts, ways of interacting with others, and attitudes towards the world. Understanding personal and social development is critical to your ability to motivate, teach, and successfully interact with students of various ages. Erikson studied stages of psychosocial development. He hypothesized that people pass through 8 psychosocial stages in their lifetimes, and he studied them through birth through old age. And he said that at each stage, there are crises or critical issues that come about, and the individual has to go about resolving them. Most people resolve each psychosocial crisis satisfactorily and put it behind them and grow, and they go on to take on new challenges and maybe move to the next stage. But some people do not completely resolve these crises and must continue to deal with them later in life. Let's see what we mean. Here are the first 4 stages and the approximate ages that each child encounters them. These are guidelines and not hard and fast. When a baby is born, from about the age of birth to 1, he's in a stage called trust versus mistrust. And in each case, you'll notice that the stage name is something positive that happens if the child resolves the conflict successfully, trust, for example. And the second part is the thing that happens if the conflict is not resolved, so mistrust. So think about it. A baby is born, he's helpless, he doesn't have a lot at his disposal. He has a few reflexes. One of the reflexes is the crying reflex. So the baby cries, and if he's picked up and rocked and held and loved, he comes to trust the world. If he does not, if he's allowed to lie for hours and cry, and many times isn't picked up, he may grow up to become a very mistrustful person. At about the ages of 2 to 4, the child enters something called autonomy, a stage called autonomy versus shame. This is typically when children are learning to potty train for the first time. And it's up to the parents to praise the child and guide them through this important step in life. If he learns to do so successfully, he may become autonomous, thinking that he can go out and accomplish things on his own. If he's shamed, then he may develop a shameful attitude and be sort of ashamed of himself and his actions. He may be fearful. It's not just potty training, but I choose that as a prime example of one of the things going on during this stage. At about the ages of 4 and 5, the child enters a period called initiative versus guilt. At this age, children are explorers of the world. And if she's taught to go out and conquer, to go boldly go forward and explore and encouraged to explore her environment, she's going to develop a sense of initiative. If she's cautioned that the world is a fearful place, or if she's told no constantly, she may learn to hang back and even feel guilty for taking that initiative. You can see how some of these steps have consequences later during the school career. Because in school, it's important to take initiative. It's important to be autonomous. It's important to trust. Ages 5 to 12 during the elementary and some into middle school are characterized by a stage called industry versus inferiority. This is when the child is going to school and learning how to work at school, so thus the word industry. And if she's successful, she learns the pleasures and benefits of productivity. But if she's not, if she feels like she can't succeed, if she's criticized overly, if she's ridiculed, she may feel inferior and feel like she can't accomplish things. These are the first 4 stages in Erikson's theory. Ages 13 to 19, adolescence are characterized by a very confusing time called identity versus aptly named confusion. And this is when the student is going out and all of a sudden peers are a big deal. Peers are so incredibly important. They become much more important than family, much more important than other adults in the student's life. If he's able to work through some of these conflicts about identity and who he is, and I want to call you back to the case study we read about the piercing, some of those gestures adolescents use to confirm their identity, then he develops a firmer sense of who he is. If he's not allowed to do that, he may either take on his parents' expectations of who he is, or he may grow very confused over who he is as a person. During early adulthood, mostly in the 20s, but extending till about 40, adults go through a period called intimacy versus isolation. This is when they're looking for that soulmate, that romantic love, the person that they want to bond to, hopefully for life. And if they have one or more relationships like that, they resolve this and they're able to connect in a very deep and intimate way with people. If not, they may grow more increasingly withdrawn and isolated for people. From about the ages of 40 to 65, you have a large period of adulthood called generativity versus stagnation. Generativity means being able to nurture and care for others. So, as you have your own children, and or as you become a teacher and you care for younger students, then you have an interest in seeing the future, seeing to the future. And if you're able to do this successfully, then you pass through this period. If not, you may feel a sense of stagnation that, for whatever reason, it could be because your earlier crises were not successfully resolved, you're not able to pay it forward, so to speak. Finally, older adults, ages 65 or so and older, enter the final stage, which is called integrity versus despair. This is when people are looking back over their lives and deciding how they did. Maybe they come to feel that their life has had meaning and they're happy with what happened. They feel a sense of integrity. Maybe they continue to offer their wisdom, the wisdom of age, to others. On the other hand, if they feel like they haven't done so well, maybe they're alienated from many of their children, or they don't have connections with family or friends, they begin to feel increasingly isolated and may develop a sense of despair. So it's easy to see how Erikson's stages build on each other. And I suspect success begets success. So if you're able to resolve some of those earliest stages, it gets easier and easier to resolve the later stages. If you get hung up on the very beginning, trust versus mistrust, for example, it's harder to overcome some of those later stages. We see the results of with going problems going through these stages in adolescence. So some of these include the problems that include emotional disorders such as depression, hopelessness, anger. You can see how if a child hasn't been taught that she can take initiative, um, you can see how this might result in hopelessness and anger. Bullying, taunting, harassment, and aggression, dropping out from school, failure, retention problems, assignment to special education, poor attendance, and depression. These are all predictors of dropping out. Drug and alcohol abuse is often connected to school failure. Delinquency is usually associated with lower achieving students. So if you don't have that sense of being able to take initiative or autonomy, that could lead to school failure. Risk of pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases, and sexual identity issues. Many of these behaviors may be traced back to unresolved conflicts from Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. Let's just take one, bullying. The children from the ages of 5 to 12, as I said, are industry versus inferiority. If a child learns to be inferior, or later in the next stage, if they grow confused about their identity, then they could certainly fall prey to bullying behaviors. Delinquency and dropping out, another social emotional problem that may be connected to Erikson. If a child feels inferior, if a child feels confused about identity, then they're going to start to feel like school is a waste of time. Why go? They're going to start to have delinquency issues, and after a while it's harder and harder to catch up, and it could be that they drop out. Let's take a little moment and practice for licensure. What I'd like you to do is to reread the opening vignette in the yellow box on page 45. Pause the video until you do so, and then we'll get started with responding to some practice questions for licensure. Question 1. As noted in the interaction between Sam and Billy, there are enormous differences between students several years apart. According to the information presented in the chapter, which of the following behaviors is more likely to be exhibited by Billy, the younger student, than by Sam, the older student? Is it to A, obey parents, B, conform to peer demands, C, assert independence, or D, be idealistic? The younger student, think about it. If you thought A, obey parents, you'd be correct. Billy is at the stage where his parents exert authority, and Billy is still at the stage where he respects that authority. Question 2. According to the information presented in the chapter, which of the following behaviors is more likely to be exhibited by Sam? Now we're talking about the older student, than by Billy, the younger student. A, follow simple rules. B, defy convention. C, expect punishment. D, be dependent on parents. If you answered B, defy convention, you would be correct. As a student's respect for authority wanes, and as he just tries to establish his identity, he's much more likely to defy convention. Question 3. Typically, a young child's social life evolves in relatively predictable ways. The social network grows from an intimate relationship with parents or other guardians to relationship with which of the following in what order? A, non-related adults, peers, and then other family members. B, peers, non-related adults, and then other family members. C, other family members, peers, and then non-related adults. Or D, other family members, non-related adults, and then peers. If you answered D, other family members, non-related adults, and then peers, you would be correct. So at first, the child is very close with his parents, and then he's close with his siblings and grandma, grandpa, aunts, and uncles, and then teachers and caregivers, and finally he moves off to peers. Question 4. One of the first signs of early adolescence is the appearance of reflectivity. What is this? A, a return to egocentric thought. B, the development of initiative. C, the ability to think about one's own mind. D, joining others and working toward a common goal. If you said C, the ability to think about one's own mind, you would be correct. Question 5. One of the most serious problems of adolescence is delinquency. Delinquents are usually A, high achievers who turn to delinquency out of boredom. B, socially adept at leading others into crime. C, low achievers who feel they can't succeed in school. D, late maturing adolescents. If you answered C, low achievers who feel that they can't succeed in school, you're correct. Question 6. According to Kohlberg's theory of moral development, how can a teacher help her students move to the next level of moral development? A. Tell them they are wrong. B. Punish them for breaking a rule. C. Read books to the class about moral behavior. D. Discuss moral dilemmas such as the trolley problem. D. Discuss moral dilemmas such as the trolley problem. That's the end of the lecture. I'll end with another quote. A quiet conscience makes one strong. This is from Anne Frank in her famous book, The Diary of a Young Girl. Enjoy the model, Jewel, and have a great week.